It's April 19th, 2026. I'm Sophia Tupolev, and this is your TV10 Weekend Edition. You might have heard some celebratory sentiment about the strong shekel as the Israeli currency dipped below 3.00 shekels per dollar. We're taking a closer look at what that story means across the broader economy today and how a nation with a 30-year high currency can see its imported consumer goods increase in prices. For daily updates, subscribe on Substack and Spotify. We do a daily recap of the top stories in Israel's business community, brought to you by Israel's Channel 10. Last week, we looked at a structural anomaly within the Israeli economy, a robust shekel acting as a highly efficient wealth transfer mechanism, subsidizing monopolistic importing cartels while quietly suffocating domestic producers. Back in February, we wrote about the strong shekel crushing tech margins. And this week, fresh macroeconomic data turned that theory into a hard reality. For the first time since the mid-1990s, the US dollar has plunged below that 3.00 shekel barrier. In a textbook macroeconomic environment, a currency, the shekel, asserting this level of dominance, would act as a massive deflationary hammer, suppressing the cost of imported goods, commodities, and supermarket staples. It should, in theory, provide liquidity relief to the Israeli consumer. Instead, the Central Bureau of Statistics reported this week that March inflation rose by 0.4% month over month. While politicians champion the strong shekel, the strong currency is offering zero relief to household balance sheets. Instead, it traps the central bank and penalizes the tech exporters who actually hold up the national GDP. So, how does a nation with a 30-year high currency see its imported consumer goods actually increase in price again? Conventional economic models dictate that currency appreciation of this magnitude should aggressively herald deflation, yet the CBS data reveals a deeply rigid domestic market. The 0.4% uptick we saw in the March CPI, driven by a 5.2% surge in fresh vegetables and a 3.0% jump in clothing, exposes a failure in the pass-through rate of the Israeli currency. Crucially, this data predates the true inflationary shock of the war and might exclude the full impact of the recent surge in energy costs. The structure of Israel's consumer market holds the clue. Economists refer to this phenomenon as the rockets and feathers hypothesis, an asymmetry where retail prices shoot up like rockets during global supply shocks, but drift down like feathers when input costs such as foreign exchange rates collapse. Mega importers and exclusive distributors are capitalizing on the sub 3.00 shekel to secure foreign goods at historic discounts. However, shielded by Byzantine regulatory barriers, kosher certification moats, and entrenched market concentration, these oligopolies maintain total pricing power. These entities are executing a textbook case of economic rent-seeking, leveraging state-sanctioned regulatory barriers to extract excess wealth from the consumer without contributing any corresponding value back into the supply chain. So today, essentially, instead of competing on price and passing on the currency dividend to the consumer, they're hoarding the margin differential. The sticky inflation currently punishing the Israeli consumer is no longer driven by global supply chain dynamics, but by local monopolistic friction. Earnings season will test this argument, so stay tuned. As the major food and retail conglomerates report their quarterly results, a glaring expansion in gross margins will serve as undeniable proof if the FX surplus is actually being captured entirely at the corporate level. For the Israeli consumer, sticky inflation is merely frustrating. For the Bank of Israel, it is paralyzing. The central bank has been effectively cornered into an impossible bind, tasked with navigating a classic stagflationary environment with a restricted toolkit. The CBS Business Tendency Survey released this week paints a harrowing picture of the domestic, non-tradable economy collapsing under the compounding weight of elevated interest rates and the geopolitical fallout of Operation Roaring Lion. The data is unequivocal. The retail and construction sectors have flipped into a negative growth territory. A staggering 89% of hospitality businesses cited the security situation as a severe operational constraint. And most tellingly, the net sentiment balance for micro-industrial enterprises, firms with under 10 employees, plummeted to negative 25.7. These SMEs are facing an acute liquidity crisis. The Ministry of Finance Accountant General implicitly acknowledged the severity of the threat this week by rushing the launch of the Lions Track State Guaranteed Loan Fund, offering prime plus 1.7% and critical grace periods. But this is a fiscal band-aid, a debt-driven forbearance measure designed to front-run a wave of insolvencies. What the SME sector actually may require is monetary easing. They need the Bank of Israel to cut the benchmark interest rate to lower their crushing debt servicing costs. But the BOI cannot pivot to accommodation. The stubborn 0.4% month-over-month CPI print, combined with a highly alarming 5.9% spike in new residential rental contracts, strictly prohibits a rate cut. To lower rates now would risk unmooring inflation expectations entirely. Consequently, the Bank of Israel is forced to maintain a restrictive monetary stance, actively suffocating the domestic economy to fight inflation that is largely driven by structural monopolies and housing supply deficits. And how does this affect our tech sector? Israel continues to attract formidable cross border capital flow, evidenced this week by Palo Alto Networks finishing its strategic acquisition of the Israeli AI defender Koi and Eagle NXT's 10 million equity injection into defense drone manufacturer Third Eye Systems. Yet, beneath these headline grabbing transactions, the day to day operational reality for Israeli exporters is deteriorating due to a severe currency mismatch. Global tech contracts and M&A valuations are universally denominated in US dollars. To understand the sheer scale of this currency drag, we can look at the recent M&A market. As an example, when Google acquired Wiz for $32 billion on March 18, 2025, that capital injection was worth roughly 115 billion shekels to the local ecosystem. Today, at a sub 3.00 exchange rate, that exact same $32 billion valuation yields just 95 billion shekels. That's a staggering 20 billion shekel difference. And that's a contraction in local purchasing power, wiped out by foreign exchange mechanics alone. While repatriated top-line revenue shrinks, operational expenditures remain firmly anchored in the expensive shekel. For US-based multinationals operating massive R&D hubs in Israel, the math is becoming untenable. These tech giants fund their global operations in dollars, but pay their local workforce in shekels. With the exchange rate plummeting, the dollar cost of maintaining those Israeli payrolls just spiked by tens of percentage points. Given that Tel Aviv software engineers are already among the highest paid in the world, this severe currency shock threatens to completely erase the cost benefit of hiring locally. If the dollar shekel pair remains depressed, multinational tech firms and local unicorns could accelerate the offshoring of R&D headcount to cheaper jurisdictions to protect their margins. If the threat of multinational hiring freezes or capital flight becomes severe enough, it could be the ultimate catalyst that forces the Bank of Israel's hand, compelling the central bank to cut interest rates, to devalue the shekel, and save the tech sector, even at the risk of letting domestic inflation run hot. I want to close with the gap between the state's wealth and the citizens' prosperity. Ultimately, the events of this week highlight a massive divergence between Israel's macroeconomic health and its microeconomic reality. Institutional capital markets remain highly confident in the state's legacy financial architecture. This was demonstrated this week with the overwhelming 805 million shekel institutional demand for Migdal Insurance Tier 1 subordinated debt issuance, which locked in a highly competitive 108 basis point spread. Furthermore, the Citizens of Israel Fund, the sovereign wealth fund managing natural gas levies, reported a massive 18.4% nominal return for 2025, pushing its assets under management to $2.8 billion. Or foreign credit rating agencies like Moody's and S&P, a 2.8 billion sovereign gas fund and a fortress-like currency signal long-term fiscal discipline. The sovereign balance sheet is, by all metrics, resilient. But sovereign wealth does not underwrite the payroll of a struggling contractor in the north, nor does it subsidize the margins of a cybersecurity startup bleeding cash on local salaries. When policymakers assess the health of the Israeli economy strictly through the lens of sovereign credit ratings and an unyielding currency, they are getting a partial picture. Until the Israeli government summons the political will to dismantle the importing cartels, enact aggressive supply-side housing reforms, and allow the historic strength of the shekel to actually reach the domestic consumer, the gap between the state's wealth and the citizens' prosperity will only widen. Through this lens, the 299 shekel dollar may not be an economic victory, but possibly a gilded trap. That's our weekend. You can find us on Substack and Spotify for a roundup of what's happening here in Israel. We'll see you tomorrow.